Okay, good. Ben, merci à tous d'être ici. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir. It's a pleasure to see all of you. So, we know that the world is facing so many crises right now. Maybe the pandemic, maybe climate change, or of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, we know also that because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and all these compounded impacts of these crises, the price of gas is higher, the price of wheat is higher. May you be living in Kigali or living in Toronto ou à Montréal. And so, therefore, more than ever, we need to make sure that these global challenges be dealt through global solutions. That is why we're here. That is why the Commonwealth is important for Canada, to be at a table to discuss with leaders and foreign ministers from countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Asia, and of course in North America. So we look forward to these discussions and obviously playing a leadership role in that context. Now, what we want to do also is, as we are in Africa, we want to invest even more in our diplomacy. We believe that more than ever, Canada's voice needs to be heard, and to do that, we need to have more tools. We need to have more resources. We need more boots on the ground. And it is a pleasure for me to announce that we will be opening an embassy for the first time here in Rwanda, in Kigali. And we'll have an ambassador also working from here in Kigali. We will also appoint a new ambassador to the African Union, which will be based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. This is a first step in making sure that we have a stronger diplomatic presence around the world, and we believe that this is actually the best moment to do so. Why? Because, as I said at the beginning, these global challenges must be dealt with. Global solutions, and diplomats need to be at the table negotiating and finding solutions. Donc voilà. Alors je fais ça en français maintenant. Plus que jamais, on sait que le monde fait face à des crises. Des crises, que ce soit celles des changements climatiques, que celles liées à la pandémie ou encore celles liées à l'invasion par la Russie de l'Ukraine qui crée une crise alimentaire mondiale. Et donc, dans les circonstances, on sait qu'on ne peut pas trouver des solutions en étant en silo. On doit être là et on doit être là à la table avec d'autres pays pour trouver des solutions mondiales à des enjeux mondiaux. Et donc, dans les circonstances, on est ici au Commonwealth pour parler avec différents pays qui sont membres du Commonwealth, qui peuvent provenir de l'Asie, de l'Afrique ou encore des Caraïbes ou de l'Amérique du Nord. Et en ce sens-là, ce sera la base de toutes nos conversations au cours des prochains jours, vraiment d'affronter ces problèmes-là qui sont ressentis de Montréal jusqu'à Kigali, parce qu'on voit que le prix des denrées, le prix du blé, le prix de l'essence, etc. augmente. En même temps, ça me fait plaisir d'annoncer au nom du gouvernement du Canada qu'on veut s'investir davantage au niveau diplomatique dans le monde. Et ma première annonce se passe ici, au Rwanda, où on va ouvrir pour la première fois une ambassade à Kigali, la capitale du Rwanda, où on aura un ambassadeur aussi qui va travailler d'ici. Et notre objectif, c'est de pouvoir travailler encore davantage également au sein de l'Union africaine. Et nous allons faire en sorte de nommer un ambassadeur qui sera basé en Éthiopie, à Addis Ababa. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on sait que l'Afrique fait face à d'immenses défis. On sait également que le narratif russe, le narratif chinois aussi, est très présent en Afrique. Et c'est important que les pays du G7, incluant le Canada, jouent leur rôle en investissant massivement en diplomatie. Alors voilà. Maybe you want to add on the Commonwealth.
Well, just a word or two. I'm very glad to be here supporting Minister Joly. You might ask why the Canadian High Commissioner to London is here in Kigali.
We're happy you were.
The simple reason is that the High Commissioners from Commonwealth countries based in London form the Board of Governors of the Commonwealth. Accordingly, I have this function on behalf of Canada to be our member of the Board of Governors for the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a unique and very special organization, 54 countries spread across 5 continents, 2.5 billion people in terms of the world's population. They come from the north and the south, from the east and the west. They are big countries and tiny countries. They are among the world's wealthiest countries and the world's poorest countries. It is a diverse institution that provides Canada with a unique voice in international affairs. The U.S., Russia, and China are by definition not there, and accordingly, Canada has a larger role to play, and it's one where we hope to have important influence on issues like climate change, for example. Getting that diverse group of countries together on climate change will be material benefit to the world in actually grappling with that challenge. Dealing with the current problem of global food insecurity. There are countries in the Commonwealth that are very directly affected by the threat of starvation, and that's brought on by a lot of factors, including climate change, but it's particularly now the consequence of the war in Ukraine and Russia's aggression. And it's critically important for Canada to have the opportunity in a forum like this, where you really see the impact of the war in Ukraine. It's important for Canada's voice to be there and to be heard. Through Minister Joly and the Prime Minister in the next 3 days, we will have important contributions to make to some very critical international discussions.
Mr. Joly, I wanted to ask, what do you see as Canada's responsibility to find solutions to the problems that were caused by the war in Ukraine, and are you expecting to be making any concrete announcements this week?
Yes, of course. Well, you've heard High Commissioner Goodale about the question of food security. So we know that because of the fact that cereals right now, grains are stuck in Odessa, in different Ukrainian ports, 50 million people are facing starvation, facing famine. And it is fundamental that we find a diplomatic solution to get the grains out. But meanwhile, we need to make sure that we help the different countries that are facing famine. And so, yes, we will do more. We have to do more. And the G7 has clearly said that all G7 countries would be stepping up. Interestingly enough, also, President Zelensky spoke to the African Union yesterday. And he said to African leaders that Russia was taking them by hostage. Why? Because of the fact that they are still bombarding Odessa. They are still attacking the southern part of Ukraine. And therefore, the breadbasket, one of the big breadbaskets of the world, which is Ukraine, is not able to export its grain.
Pourquoi ça serait important d'avoir le mot Ukraine dans le communiqué final? Qu'est-ce que vous êtes prêt à faire pour convaincre les membres du Commonwealth, notamment en raison de la sécurité alimentaire, pour faire ce compromis?
Mais je pense que c'est important qu'on reconnaisse qu'il y a présentement une invasion illégale et injustifiable de l'Ukraine par la Russie. Maintenant, on est aussi ici pour écouter ce que les pays africains ont à nous dire ou les pays qui viennent d'ailleurs. Parce qu'ils vivent leur propre réalité, font face à leurs propres enjeux. Et nous, on est ce pays qui n'a pas de passé à l'externe colonialiste, qui fait en sorte qu'il peut être une bonne écoute, qui peut offrir une bonne écoute. Et donc, dans les circonstances, on est souvent ce pouvoir diplomatique-là qui peut amener les gens à la table pour trouver une solution et c'est certainement notre objectif. En même temps, l'autre chose, c'est que ce qui est très important présentement, c'est l'unité de l'Ouest par rapport à la Russie. On se dirige par la suite au G7 et par la suite à l'OTAN. Alors, on va pouvoir être informé de ce que les différents pays du Commonwealth pensent lorsqu'on sera à la table du G7 et de l'OTAN.
At least 10 Commonwealth countries they abstained from condemning Russia at the UN. So it seems like it's a bit of a challenge to convince other Commonwealth nations that they should condemn Russia and support Ukraine. What's the key to Canada in getting support around that?
Well, I think that's why it's important to be here, to hear their perspective, to engage. For example, tomorrow I'll have the opportunity to sit down and have a long conversation with my Indian counterpart That's definitely my goal, to understand why did they take that decision, because usually it's always based on their own national realities. And so that's where we are able to find a consensus eventually, and to make sure that all countries recognize that the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty must be affirmed and also defended at all times.
This is a continent that has a great deal of Russian influence. It has a great deal of Chinese influence. How much is your decision to upgrade the diplomatic mission here influenced by that? And will we see other parts of Africa which are contested with the West also get the same?
So obviously we know that there's a long-standing relationship between Canada and Rwanda, and that goes back to the years where Roméo Dallaire was here. And so we want to make sure that we build on the people-to-people ties. There is a very strong Rwandese community back home as well. But what is happening here in Rwanda is the future of Africa. And we know that Rwanda is playing a leadership role and is showing a lot of progress. And so that's why it's strategic to be here. Meanwhile, yes, we know that Russia is present on the continent. Yes, we know that China is increasingly present also on the continent. So we can't be naive. We need to make sure that we have our diplomats on the ground with eyes and ears, listening to what's going on, to make sure that we can play a role, a positive role, with Rwanda and the entire region. G7 countries are here. We need to be here.
Can I just ask you about Afghanistan? Big earthquake
Yes,
today,
of course.
lots are killed. And I wonder if your officials, if you've had a chance, if there's a response Canada can contribute to.
Yes, of course. So of course our hearts and thoughts are with people of Afghanistan in the face of this horrible tragedy, this very important earthquake. Afghanistan was also facing such a difficult situation before, and I had the chance to meet with MPs, former women MPs from Afghanistan just last week in Ottawa, as they were explaining to me how much the situation is dire. So my colleague Harchajan is working on solutions right now. I'm supporting him, and I'll be talking to David Spruill a bit later today to make sure that we can be informed of what is going on, and we can work with the UN, which is offering humanitarian aid.
Minister, isn't our humanitarian assistance hobbled by the fact that any money going to Afghanistan is a violation of our criminal code?
How we deal with humanitarian aid for Afghanistan is we always do it through the UN. And so that is how we provide help. At this point, we're at $145 million, and it is through UNICEF and through other UN agencies.
I appreciate and respect that, but you had a series of Canadian humanitarian groups testifying before the House of Commons Special Committee on Afghanistan, saying that their efforts to help in Afghanistan in crises, previous crises to this, were being hobbled by our law.
On this very issue, what I've said to all my counterparts in the House of Commons is I'm willing to work with them to find a solution. Meanwhile, there is an earthquake that just happened. We need to make sure that aid is sent, and we'll work with the UN.
Minister, just 2 points on Russia. I mean, some of the Commonwealth nations are neutral at best, friendly, even allied, you know, in terms of dealing with Russia. They've been isolated effectively at the G7, the EU, and NATO, but it's a different equation here. So given that dynamic, I mean, how likely or realistic is it that you get any kind of a unified condemnation of the invasion coming out of Commonwealth? And second, what efforts will you take when meeting with the African Union and other countries to counter the argument coming out of the Kremlin that food shortages and price shock are a result of sanctions as opposed to the blockades of the war?
Well, we were very supportive of President Zelensky talking directly to the African Union. It was important precisely because of that, to make sure that he could and we all could support him in countering Russia's narrative. It is clear that Russia is taking hostage Africa, and clear that Russia is taking hostage people that need to have access to food to be able to survive. And so we are in a dire situation right now. I was at the UN a month and a half ago talking about this. The UN has been trying to negotiate a deal for more than 8 weeks. And because of Russia's insistence and because of Russia's continuing to bombard and to shell Odessa and other Ukrainian ports, things are not moving in the right direction. So at this point, the EU is working on making sure that grains are getting out through road, rail, different paths. We are ready to send ships to Romania, basically to get every single grain out of Ukraine. We need to free the wheat, free the grains. If we don't do so, there is another crisis that is that we'll have to deal with. I always say that we're in the third stage of the war. The first one was to prepare for the invasion, and we worked a lot, particularly within NATO about that on this very issue. The second one was really to deal with the impacts of the invasion and help Ukraine defend itself. And clearly, this is still the phase in which we are. But the third phase just started, which is really the geopolitical impacts of the war. And from the grains being stuck to when people here in Africa will start not being able to have access to wheat, time is running. And so that's why it's important to be here and to talk.
How do you counter the message, though? I mean, we saw the leader of Senegal saying that he blames this on sanctions. So after meeting with Vladimir Putin, he doesn't blame it necessarily on the conflict and on the war. So what do you do there?
We'll have a good conversation also with the leader of Senegal, Macky Sall. I've had the chance to meet also with his foreign minister, and we will step up our aid. And we'll have more to announce very
Ça aurait
soon.
pu aider si M. Zelensky avait pu parler directement aux membres du Commonwealth et pourquoi est-ce qu'il n'a pas été invité?
Je pense qu'il a parlé déjà à l'Union africaine et je pense qu'il parle à plusieurs audiences à travers le monde, mais on doit le soutenir et c'est ce que nous allons faire.
What about the concerns of
When you say Canada can do more on the food shortages, what you said sending ships to Romania, that's one possibility. What are the options that Canada has to do more?
We'll have more to say very soon on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.